You're here for season 7 of the Whole Horse Podcast, now at 110 episodes and counting. I'm your host, Alexa Linton, coming to you from Vancouver Island in Canada. I can't wait to continue to share thought-provoking, edge-pushing, geeky, and often challenging conversations with horse professionals from all areas of our industry who are working to make horses' lives better. This season, you can look forward to more on the specifics of creating enriching, healthy horse spaces, an area I'm particularly passionate about. I'm so excited that you're here listening in, meeting great horsey humans, and hopefully learning a new thing or two about horses and yourself. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and welcome back. You're here for the Whole Horse Podcast, and I'm very excited to introduce you today. If you haven't met her already, I have Julianne Lee here, who is the founder of the Adored Beast Apothecary and much, much more. I've been very excited to chat with Julie for a few reasons, which we'll get into shortly today. But to say she's an expert in her field is an understatement. And I want to turn it over to you, Julie, and welcome you. Thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
It's so great to have you. So I'd love you to share, first of all, a little of your journey, because I know it's been quite something over, like I was reading, I think that you took your first degree, I think it was like 1979, you did your vet tech. And then, from then on, so you've been doing this work for a really long time. Can you,
Really long.
can you share a little bit about that journey and sort of where you're at now as well?
Yeah, I grew up on a rescue. So my mom rescued animals and predominantly dogs, but we had horses and ponies and everything. And I moved into doing tech stuff. And the reason that I did that was because I kind of had to decide. I was riding competitively. And I had to decide if I was going to ride competitively and go to school and try to do both, or I was going to actually quit riding and move and go to vet school. So I chose the tech route, and then quite quickly I moved into taking extra courses in the equine field with all kinds of stuff. And from ultrasounds to fertility to a million different things. And then I worked for an equine vet, fertility vet for a while, I was doing the ultrasounds. And what happened was, I was working as a tech for a pretty large clinic and started seeing just correlations with things like vaccines and then animals getting stuff right after being vaccinated. And, I was there for long enough to start seeing animals' life expectancies dwindle, right? Like animals getting sicker, younger, dying earlier, getting chronic disease sooner. And then my family's very holistic. Well, at least my mom is. So we were raised very holistically. And when I went to school, I kind of jumped ship, right? Because you're learning. And I think that's where I have that compassion for conventional vets and conventional and science and things like that. Because, if you're going to go to school and you're going to work that hard to learn, it's awfully hard to learn something that you're not believing in, right? So
Yeah.
I sort of jumped ship, and my grandmom and mom even had an intervention with me saying, Julie, ever since you've been doing this, like this is what you need to be doing, but ever since you've been doing this, then we have taken the animals to the vets, and they never went to the vets before. And I told them, they had to vaccinate everything and feed it kibble, and like it
Yes.
was crazy. But then my dog wound up getting cancer, and he was only 4. So I freaked out because I didn't want to do the conventional road. And so my mom said, you need to take him to Virginia, who was our herbalist and sort of our family doctor, quote unquote. And I did. And I also took him to a board certified internal medicine specialist. And he was diagnosed with a tumor in his just outside of his large intestine, in his colon, actually. And they were going to have to resect a large piece of his bowel. And he had a really poor prognosis. And so, but they couldn't get him in for a while, I think like 11 days or something. So Virginia and I worked on him with like SCX suppositories and like she was giving him stuff like crazy. And I took him in for the surgery, and he was supposed to stay there for 5 days. and they called me after the surgery and they said, we don't know what you're doing, but the vet called me, really nice man. He said, I'm not sure what you're doing, but whatever you're doing, keep doing it, because we didn't have to resect anything. This
Wow.
went from the size of like a golf ball to the size of a grape. It was completely encapsulated, so it wasn't really, really invasive into the mucosal lining. So anyways, that happened. I took him home. He recovered. I started really questioning what I wanted to do. So I went to Spain and to visit my girlfriend to really go, okay, I don't want to do anything with animals anymore. Maybe I want to be a naturopath. I didn't know. I got sick in Spain,
Hmm.
really sick in Spain with a sort of a hemorrhagic gastritis that I used to get when I was stressed, even when I would show horses. And I'd be really sick with it for like weeks. So I went to the hospital and I remember being there. And as soon as they knew it was something chronic, something that I'd had before,
Yep.
they brought another doctor in and he started asking me questions about, was I stressed? What was happening in my life? I was just lying there going, oh my God, okay, just give me the drugs. Like I'm gonna die. And then he treated me homeopathically in the hospital. And within 3 days, I was backpacking again. Like
Wow.
it was like a miracle for me. And I think it was a real massive, it had to happen. Like it was this massive intervention
Yeah.
to make me then go, I don't know what this homeopathy is, but I want to do it. Right. So that started me on my journey of trying to find where to go because I had all these animals and I would have had to put them all into quarantine to go to England. And then they opened a school. They held it at UBC in Vancouver, and I was living in Ontario. So I moved out there with all my animals, my horses and my dogs and
Oh
my
my
cats.
gosh.
And I went to
Wow.
school for 4 years and did a human homeopathic medicine program. But like 2 minutes into the course, I was driving my professors crazy putting it into animals.
Yeah.
And he said to me, well, why don't you just do animals? And I said, well, first of all, I don't think that there's a course that's really qualifying, like nothing like this. And two, I'm not a vet. I'm not a
Yeah.
conventional vet. And I can't get into the 4 weekend program that was out there. So he really pulled some strings. And I always say that it was all my angel animals,
Mm.
but got me into the British Homeopathic Veterinary Surgeons program in England.
Wow.
And I did my 4 years as with human homeopathic medicine, and then I did 3 years in England, and then I did a lot of other stuff. So when I came back, I opened the first licensed holistic veterinary hospital in Canada. And then from there, it just exploded. I had like four, well, I had 5 clinics, four I owned, one
Hmm.
I managed when I moved from BC to
Yeah.
Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I also did a program for vets, homeopathic program, postgraduate program for vets at UBC that I wrote with Sue Armstrong from the British Homeopathic Veterinary Surgeons. Flew in Jackie Sign. Anyways, it was great. It was so inspiring and was wonderful. And then practiced for 20 years in BC, a lot of animals, horses, dogs, cats, ferrets, you name it, snakes, was in India, elephants, and really started putting things together about health with animals. And a big part of that was the microbiome. So when I felt it was time, I really saw a gap in the education piece of really educating and empowering pet parents to take control of their animals' lives and not
Hmm.
just tag along. So I sold my practices and I moved out east. And, quite quickly after that, opened a Door Abuse Apothecary
Mm.
and started putting together the products that I used at my clinic.
Amazing. Amazing. All right, Julie. Well, I have so many questions about nature-based animal health care remedies and homeopathic remedies. And we were chatting a little bit before our time together and already discovered several spots, like gaps, even for me who, I know quite a bit about homeopathy. I think I've learned over the years, but there's still places where it's like, how do I use these properly, or how do I give them properly, or how long? So I'd love to really pick your brain about this. For you, what are the big sort of things that us as horse owners, animal people, because let's face it, most horse people have other animals,
Yeah.
that we're doing in terms of use of homeopathy that is
Yeah.
just maybe not working or not, creating as an effective result as we may be wanting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's many different ways of looking at homeopathy. Classical, right? Classical homeopathy, and then we have combination remedies, and then we have all different kinds and stuff. And I know when I first graduated and when I went to India, and I was very much the classical homeopath. You give one dose and wait and see, and then I started practicing. And I started looking at the difference between people and animals, like prescribing between people and animals, and really started digging into Hahnemann a little bit more, what he was talking about with children and what he was talking about with chronic disease, right? So, how often do you give a remedy in chronic disease? And he was a big, this is going to be a long sort of drawn out understanding of this, but he was a big believer in you have to remove the obstacle to cure, right? So, and this is pretty philosophical, and it's my belief and not the belief of everybody, but as an example, he would say, I can treat someone for asthma and we can cure the asthma, but it's not going to be cured if they continue to live in a basement that's full of mold, a damp basement, right? So if we're not going to remove that person from that situation, it's impossible for homeopathy to cure it, right? Because you have an obstacle to becoming cured.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when we look at, and that was, a very, 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 very long time ago. And when we look at health now with people and animals, and we look at chronic disease with people and animals, we're looking at pollution, we're looking at environmental allergies, we're looking at things that animals and people are coming into contact with on a regular basis that are potentially obstacles to cure, right? Like
Yep.
having cell phones stuck on our heads all the time, being in Wi-Fi all the time, being, not knowing what's in our food, different chemicals in our food, not having enough nutrition in our food to either, sustain us or allow us to thrive. Especially horses when they are so dependent on the soil. People don't really think about
Yep.
that, right? They don't
Yep.
think about the soil quality of their hay and how that soil quality feeds the nutrients that they eat. So when you look at homeopathy, it is, in my opinion, still very classical because Hahnemann would, in fact, give a remedy to a patient that was really sick overnight, let's say, and say to them, or to their caregiver, they need to get this when they look like this, or they need to get this when this happens, or they need to get this in another hour and then watch for this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or he quite literally sat by their bedside for the entire time, right? We
Yep.
don't live in that day. We don't live in the day of our vet sitting beside in the stall of our horse all night long to monitor how they're doing. We don't live in a situation where that happens anymore with any species, right? So I look at a lot of the stuff with our horses being chronic disease that isn't necessarily curable. And when I say that, people just
Mm-hmm.
gasp, right? They're like, oh my God, what means my horse is going to be whatever. And that's not what it means. It actually means that, when you put a horse in a situation where it is in a stall all the
Mm-hmm.
time, it is taken out and it's ridden and then it's put back in. It isn't allowed to be a horse, or a dog that's not allowed to be a dog, or a cat that's not allowed to hunt and be outside and be a cat. Like I'm not judging this. I'm simply saying you can't expect that in itself is an obstacle to cure. Not allowing an animal to live in an environment that is best for their species
Yep.
is an actual obstacle to cure from a homeopathic perspective, right? So I look at giving remedies. The potency is different. So if you have an acute situation, you're giving high potencies really often.
Mm-hmm.
When you're in a chronic situation, you're giving lower potencies more often. And then for me, when you're seeing a horse that has an autoimmune disease that, they're constantly getting hives, or they've got chronic, they're getting colic all the time, or they've got metabolic
Yep.
disease, or
Yep.
they've got, like, I mean, the list goes on and on, not Cushing's, like the
Yeah.
list goes on and on,
Arthritis. Yeah. Yeah.
arthritis, anything, like PTSD, aggression, weaving, cribbing. We could sit here
Mhm.
for an hour and say all things that a horse could have, or a dog, or a cat, or a person, or anything. To think that you were gonna, go in and wham bam, thank you, ma'am, like they did 200 years ago is not realistic. So
No.
what I look at is what are the remedies? There's a difference between a constitutional remedy, which is you're giving a remedy that matches every single solitary thing. You're just giving a single remedy and you're hoping that it's going to shift something. We can still do that. We can still really individualize that. But then when we want to look at metabolic syndrome, right, or if we want to look at something like that, we want to look at giving daily remedies that support the pancreas, support the, with pancreatitis in dogs, and and like the sugar contents with horses and things like that. We want to give remedies. I love physiology.
Hmm.
And I actually taught at the American Homeopathic Veterinary Conference about looking at matching physiology and homeopathy,
Mm.
and thinking to ourselves what remedies match the physiology, like which remedies can be so like or so similar
Yep.
that really what it's doing is it's giving the body a little bit of a remembrance of what does it actually have to do, because it gets very confused, right?
Hmm.
You have an influx of cortisol from stress, you have improper diets, you've got, again, the list goes on and on and on. The body's innate wisdom to do what it needs to do, it doesn't have the tools. It just doesn't have the tools. So when you give homeopathy in a way where it's supportive to have sort of a remembrance of like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do now, and this is
Yep.
what I'm supposed to do now, and this is what, to me, that's supportive homeopathy. That's supportive homeopathy in chronic disease.
Yep.
So, so I like my horses that I have here at my rescue. I would be silly to think that I'm going to get these horses and cure them. Like I would just be in a loony bin right now, because these horses have had every single solitary thing in the world, including holistic medicine, done to them when
Yep.
they come to see me and or come to live here. But what I can tell you is I've been able to fine tune it enough that I'm able to do just that. So, you get these horses in and you're like, oh, well, wow, if we get a year with them and they have this incredible life and they have love and they have freedom and they have all of
Hmm.
this stuff, that'll be amazing, or whatever. And I have horses that have been here for 10 years and
Yep.
they're like running down the fields and bucking and kicking. They're still on remedies every day, right? They're still on these chronic remedies every single 3 times a day,
Yep.
And then they get acute remedies if they fall or if they get hurt or if they get, too rambunctious and they kick each other, or they get different things.
Mm.
So people are scared of homeopathy, and it's nothing to be scared of. What if a horse gets approving? What if my dog gets approving? What if I get approving? If you're, and I think I've talked to you about this lots before about being aware and observant.
Yep.
That's the key to me for health, period. It doesn't matter whether it's homeopathy, it doesn't matter if it's Chinese medicine, it doesn't matter if you're just a backyard horse owner that just adores their horse. It's like you have to be observant. That is like the key to me,
Yeah.
the key to being able to empower ourselves to keep our animals healthy, is we have to pay attention, right? We can't just be, on our cell phones out in a paddock and not noticing subtle changes. We have to really be present. We have to know what is super normal, what's not normal, what does it look like as they're getting not normal. Like
Yep.
it's this innate wisdom we all have. We just don't use it enough. So, when you can do that, you can get ahead of a lot of stuff too, right? So
Mm.
I always say if you're observant and you know what you're treating your horse for, like if you're treating your horse for Cushing's, let's just say that, and you know the signs and symptoms that presented for your horse with Cushing's, and you're giving, I don't know, let's say pulsatilla. I'm not saying
Yep.
pulsatilla is a Cushing's remedies, because unless it's a constitution, it really isn't. But let's say you're giving pulsatilla and all of a sudden your horse starts getting, a yellow milky discharge from its nose. And it's never had that. It didn't have that when it had Cushing's.
Yep.
Like it's never been, you could then go, oh, I wonder if they're having approving of this remedy, because they've never had it.
Mm.
It's not difficult to know if an animal or yourself is having a proving because you start getting symptoms that you've never had before. And,
Wow.
and those symptoms are part of the picture of that remedy.
Very interesting. So can you explain, because I've learned about homeopathic remedies and various things, but I've never actually heard that term approving. So can you explain what that means?
Yeah, so there's some people think that there's cure, there's suppression, there's provings, there's aggravations, right? There's all these technical terms to become a homeopathic physician, doctor,
Yep.
practitioner, whichever country you're living in. And that's the basis of knowing whether you're on the right track of giving the right remedy. So when you're on the curative path, then that means that usually the symptoms go away in the opposite direction in which they came,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you've got a horse that the end result was hives, let's
Yep.
say, and before the hives, it had issues with inflammation, laminitis or something. And then before that, it had some chronic discharge from its eye or whatever. So, you would see it going away with the hives going away first, and then maybe you would see the
Right.
next thing going away, and then the next thing going away, and the next thing going away. That's the direction of cure, right?
Yep.
Where it's going in the order of direction. The next thing is suppression, which I don't really believe in, to be honest, but there is a thing, they believe that if you give the wrong remedy and you give it too often, and all the symptoms go away. If it's not the right remedy, it's just suppressing it. It's not curing it. In all my years of doing homeopathy, I've never seen that. Like
Yep.
I have never witnessed that. Thousands, tens of thousands of animals that I've worked with. Then there's aggravations, which means you give the remedy and the symptoms of the remedy or the symptoms of the disease get worse. So let's say something's vomiting. Let's just
Yep.
use let's just use that as an example. Something's vomiting and you give a remedy and then the vomiting gets a little bit worse,
Right.
right? But then it goes away. So you have a bit of an aggravation or skin or hives or something like that, or even, potentially even, laminitis or something where they get even stiffer and a little more sore for 24 hours. And then but the way you would know if it's an aggravation is then they should get better.
Yep.
It goes up, but then it drastically goes down, right? Drastically improves.
Got it.
So I have seen that. I have seen that still not very often, but it's probably just the way I prescribe stuff. And then we have something called provings. And a proving is where you're giving the remedy and you're giving it too often. So then the body starts to produce symptoms of what the remedy is.
Right.
Right. So
Yep.
let's say, and that's how they discovered homeopathy.
Got it. Yeah.
The arnica, let's use a remedy that a lot of people know. It's pain, right? So, they give a bunch of people. That's the cool thing about homeopathy. It's tested on people, not animals.
Mhm.
And, they give a group of people arnica and they don't know what they're taking. And everybody's like got, different people that are supervising them. And the supervisors don't know what they're having or anything. So nobody knows what they're taking. And then they give it until they start showing symptoms of it. So they usually give very low potencies and provide more of a crude substancey thing.
Yep.
And then, so they would get sore, right? They wouldn't want to be touched. They they would start showing symptoms of arnica,
Yep.
right? So that's how they prove the remedies. And then they give that remedy to someone that had, like, it's very high. I think it's like 90% of all the people that are doing it need to have those symptoms in order for it to be like black type,
Got
meaning
it.
that it really helps with those things. And then you give that, then they started giving that to people that had those symptoms to see if it would then take it away, and it did,
Right.
right? Different people that really did get kicked by a horse or
Yeah.
fell down a cliff or whatever,
Yeah.
like injured, really
Yep.
severely injured people. So there's lots of different ways, but I like I said, I haven't unless you were giving like very high potencies
Yep.
and every day and numerous times a day for a long period of time. I can't even imagine. I can't really imagine too many provings, but if you're
Yep.
paying attention, you'll know right away.
Right. Just like, yeah, if we have that awareness, it's like, oh, yeah, something's a little off or whatnot. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, or oh, that's so interesting. I went and I decided to give my horse pulsatilla because the his arthritis matches pulsatilla exactly.
Hmm.
That's just because pulsatilla is better by movement, better out in the air. Like there's lots of different things, right? So I've given him pulsatilla because it fits his arthritis totally. And the arthritis is getting better, but I'm continuing to give it because he's got such bad navicular
Yep.
disease that it's not like it's going to cure that bone. And so I keep giving it, and then one day I go out and it's just the horse is well, but it's got some creamy white discharge coming out of its
Yep.
nose. And you're like, oh, that's interesting. So before you freak out, it's probably important to go back to your materia medica and look at the nose symptoms, and if it's there, then you stop the pulsatilla. And if it goes away, then it was the remedy. If it doesn't go away, then the horse has got something else going on,
Yep. Yep.
you know? So
Totally.
it isn't difficult to know whether or not you're creating improving.
Yeah. That's very, very helpful. Thank you for that. And so I know I run into this as well. I'm not a very detail oriented person, and I don't speak for all of the horse industry or horse people that use homeopathics, but I tend to, I feel guilty even admitting it to you, but tend to take the lazy man's route and like just put my remedies in my feed because it's hard to try to get them in their mouth without anything. Yeah, without feed.
And who told you had to give them without feed?
I have heard this for years. Does it matter?
I give all my remedies in feed.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, I
I
love
mean,
this.
unless, okay, so let's say it's colic.
Yes.
And it's one of the first things that I say to them down there. If we think we have a colic situation, I'm like, okay,
Yeah.
put some colic in, like, because I have a remedy called colic
Yep.
I make up. Put colic remedy into a piece of a carrot,
Yep.
and then they'll call me back. They won't take the carrot. It's like, okay, they definitely have colic.
Yep.
Then, or
Totally.
something like that. So then I go down and I mix it up in a syringe.
Yep. I just
And
syringe it.
then I have to syringe it in their mouth because there is
Okay.
no other way of getting it in,
Okay.
right? Because they
Okay.
don't want to eat and they're getting the.
Totally.
So I syringe it, but normally what I do is I get it liquid, and then I just pull out their bottom lip and squirt it in their lip.
Totally. Totally. And I've done it with spray containers as
Yeah.
well. My one mare, totally happy with that. My other is like hells to the no if she's feeling good. So yeah, that's super helpful to know.
Okay, so I have cows. I've
Yep.
rescued cows as well. And putting anything in their mouth is virtually impossible. I had a concussion that way, the whole nine yards, because they swing their heads
Totally.
and
Yeah.
they're like blocks, right? They're like you get hit with that, and it's not fun. So you can even give it vaginally or
Okay.
anally,
Yep.
right? So the one particular cow I was thinking of did have, some issues that I couldn't get anything into her because she was in too much pain, and there was no way I was getting near her.
Yep.
So I did do that. I resorted to doing that. I'd seen it on dairy farms in
Yep.
England when I was working in England. I saw lots of it on dairy farms, them administering them that way. So I tried it.
Yep.
And it worked.
Okay. Amazing.
Mm.
Amazing. So with something like I'm thinking of a particular remedy that you sell, which would be the jump for joints, for
Yeah.
example. My girls both really love it. I do a lot of muscle testing. They both, yeah, especially my mare Diva, who's 25. She's like, yes, please, every day. I can't do it 3 times a day. I'm only there once a day. So they get their feed once a day. So with something like that, for more of a chronic thing where for Diva, it's sort of low grade, starts of arthritis at 25. So giving that in their feed, sort of their mash once a day, is that going to be, at least making a bit of a dent for
Oh, of
them?
course.
Yeah.
Of course it is. Yeah. And and when she gets to a point where she's even older,
Yeah.
and one stays in cutting it, then you can literally put it in their water. Like you
Right.
can pour it in their water. Right. And then
Yep.
you might be getting it 5 or 6 times a day,
Totally.
7 or 8 times a day, depending.
Yep.
But I have never seen it go sideways. And
Yep.
I've seen a lot of people have to do that.
Yeah.
It's just put it in their water because for that exact reason,
Yep.
because they can't get out more than once a day. The horse is really in bad shape, it always helps.
Yeah.
It always and I've never seen it be the opposite.
Fantastic.
You know,
That's, yeah,
if you ever are worried, then you can just put it in one, like put 2 buckets of water out for them
yep.
and just put one, and the chances of them drinking from both buckets is likely. But then, you if you really are concerned about getting it into them, just put it in their water.
I love that. That's a great suggestion. And I know they're so there's such an innate wisdom there for them to even choose like, the one bucket that has it, oh, this has this has the good stuff for me. So
Yeah,
yeah, that's great. Oh,
yeah, for
it's
sure.
so helpful. Thank
Well,
you. And
that's what they do for cattle, right? So I remember one time I was working with this organic cattle farm that had really bad pink eye. And they I don't know how much time and energy and money they spent trying to
uh-huh.
get rid of this pink eye. A bunch of the cattle came out of the organic certification part, the whole 9 yards. And I made up like a combination remedy for them, and they just put it in their trough, in their water trough.
Yep.
They were bringing these cattle in, like penning them up. They were like real free run cattle, but they had to bring them in, and they had to like try to medicate them and treat their eyes, and it was brutal. So finally, they still had to bring them in because they had to put them in water, but at least they didn't have to stress them out to do anything for
Yep.
them,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And they put it in it, and they said within 3 days, they were probably 50% better within 3 days.
Amazing.
And then within 10 days in total, not one of them had any signs of it anymore. One of them
That's,
lost their eye, but it was like at a point where I knew that was
yeah.
gonna happen
Yeah.
before it started. It was so bad, but
Yeah, that's so amazing. I'm excited for our listeners who maybe haven't ventured into working with homeopathics to listen to this because I think it's something like say with the jump for joints where we go to like all these other joint supplements or other things. And it feels like for me when I feed it, it's like working on sort of a very different level than say,
mhm.
a more what would we call it like a straight up supplement or even an herbal remedy that there would be a different level that it's able to kind of work for the
Well, it, and
horses.
it and it does, because it's got the concept behind jump for joints is that it's like I always say it works like a scaffold.
Mm,
So it's not just for the joint, it's for everything. It's for the muscles, the tendons, the ligament, the cartilage, the bone, the periosteum of the bone. It works on every aspect of the joint, not just the joint. So when you feed it, it does address a lot more than just the joint. Just addresses the whole thing that keeps the joints supported as well.
I love that.
And I know with MSM, it can be really hard on horses' stomachs.
Yep.
It can be really hard. A lot of times an animal that has arthritis, a horse that has arthritis also doesn't have a very good gut
Yep.
microbiome. They're often not absorbing their nutrients and things. So if they're not absorbing nutrients, then they're not absorbing their joint supplement very well either. Like
Yep.
what's the bioavailability of it and things like that. So that's why there's lots of good joint supplements, don't get me wrong, like lots, but it's why I started Jump for Joints
Yep.
too, because we needed, well, actually, it's not true. I started Jump for Joints because I was seeing so many torn cruciate ligaments in my
And
clinic.
dogs. Yep.
That was specifically formulated for torn cruciate ligaments, and then people started coming back and going, "Holy man! Like everything is working better on this dog. Like doesn't have
Mm-hmm.
arthritis anymore, like for older dogs and things
Yep.
like that." So then I started playing with it just with arthritic dogs or hit by cars or like any kind of sort of joint injury as well. And it just worked amazing. So, you don't have to worry about, is it bioavailable? It starts helping them within seconds.
Yep.
Not, it doesn't have to go through the whole digestive system, and It is very different. It's very, very different than, and it can, the other cool thing is it can be given along with everything.
I was going to ask
So,
that next. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, sometimes we have to stop certain herbs and stop certain joint supplements when the horse is going to go on any kind of a steroid or
Yep.
anti-inflammatory drugs, specifically NSAIDs.
Yeah.
We have to be really careful of herbs with that. So when it comes to homeopathy, you don't have to worry about any contraindication with any drugs at
Yeah.
all, ever.
That's amazing because, I know whether I like it or not, there's a lot of horses on NSAIDs, and to be able to give them that extra support and maybe get to a point where they can have a breather or, something where they can build, like you said, that scaffolding
Yeah.
to be able to potentially make a
Well,
shift.
I'm glad you said build because every single horse except for one that I
Yep.
have has had or has some kind of arthritic issues, whether that's chronic laminitis, something metabolic that affected their
Yep.
joints, whether it's just arthritis, overworking, an injury that was never rested, the list goes on and on again. Every horse that came here was on a ton, except for two, was on a ton of drugs.
Yep.
And if they weren't on drugs, it was because they were usually being, probably they often didn't have food either, those
Yes.
ones, right? So they were starving and neglected and everything. They were definitely not on drugs. But, anytime I look at drugs and horses or drugs with any animals, building them up while they're on the drugs
Yep.
is ideal, right? That's ideal. Is, getting number one, getting gut support in there.
Oh, yeah. It's
Yeah,
huge. It's huge.
massive. And they can continue staying on the drugs when you're doing that, depending on, again, on what you're looking at. But trying to heal the gut, trying to create more diversity of bacterias, healing herbs, things like that. And then like jump for joint, some like homeopathy for their
Yep.
joint pain. It's incredible. And then you start to reduce the drugs once
Yep.
they're at a place where that you're looking at them and going, I can just feel that they feel better.
Yeah.
And then you start to reduce the drugs, and thank God, touch wood, I don't have any horses down there on any
Mm.
kind of, or in any at all.
Amazing.
Doesn't mean we
Amazing.
never use them, because
Yeah.
sometimes we do with the really, really hard cases, but they're off of them in 3 days.
I was going to
Right.
say they're on and off, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what I'll do sometimes with my girls. My one mare was on daily Prebicox for 2 years when she came to me at
Mhm.
6, and had had a previous parasite infestation that had really rocked her socks digestively. And it was the first thing that I did was just bolster her system so that I could wean her off her Prebicox. And because her gut was at a point where she was like fecal water like 24/7. That was
Yeah.
just how she was normally not that time, and just not absorbing nutrients, all those things. So it just became so apparent that the digestion leading to inflammation, all of these pieces were really, really detrimental to her. And one of the things I would love to ask you about this actually, because it's so curious to me. When she's not feeling well, she smells super weird.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I can tell immediately when she has inflammation. She smells sweet and strange. And it's like, oh yeah,
Yeah,
something's
well,
happening.
that does happen all the time.
Yep.
As well, chronic inflammation has to be processed through the kidneys or the liver,
Yep.
or, so they start to, so can people. So can dogs' breaths can change, and cat breath can change, when there's chronic inflammation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so interesting. I found that a fascinating piece. Like, when she was really bad, I could smell her from like 25 feet away. It was so weird. Just
Mm.
that inflammation kind of coming off of her body. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it was
Mm,
probably her kidneys or something
yep.
trying to process something.
I'm thinking so. I'm
Yeah.
thinking
Yeah, no, what
so.
I think that's pretty common.
Wow.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about so in the horse industry, I haven't seen it a lot. Heard a few people talk about it as the use of medicinal mushrooms. And obviously, everybody, I'm not talking about psilocybin, but things like turkey tail, chaga. Can you share a little bit about why that's become kind of part of some of the things that you carry and work with?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, I look at, horses in the wild, they would be eating things off bark
Yeah.
and trees and really, a lot more than even dogs too, right?
Yep.
So turkey tail and chaga are the two that are in my barn, and that's because it's the two that we are producing right now. It's no different than it is with people. So it's incredible for their immune system. There's so much research on both of those medicinal mushrooms from many, many, many peer-reviewed studies
Hmm.
with cancer and immune mediated diseases and general health and things like that. They're both very good, especially turkey tail. It's really, really good for the gut as a
Yep.
prebiotic. I find horses really sensitive, like really, really sensitive,
Oh, yeah.
much, much more so than a dog or a cat. And they show that sensitivity through, different ways, whether that's in their performance, whether it's in their attitudes, whether it's in their smell, their feces, their whatever, if their manure changes. I think that when I use mushrooms, they're so medicinal, like so medicinal, but they're so food based, right? Like there's not a lot of fractionization with them
Yep.
or you know, they're very, very, very natural. They're really, really, really easy to digest,
Yep.
easy to process. So there's so much wisdom in mushrooms, it's ridiculous. And I feel like horses are the same way. Like
Yes.
I think that, when we're around our horses, there's something to be said when they say that they're sentient beings, right? So it just seems to match them really well. It
Yeah.
just seems to match their species, right? It
Yep.
it it, it seems to really align with what a horse is. You know,
Oh, yeah.
I I think, something that is growing on the ground that, they're grazers. They're grazers. They chew on trees and limbs and all kinds of stuff in the wild.
Oh, yeah.
So I think that, they're closer to the ground grazing that way than people or dogs or cats. It's incredible for people and dogs and cats too. So
Yeah.
I'm a bit of a mushroom nerd and lover. But yeah, medicinal mushrooms for horses are they're very unused, right?
Very
They really,
unused. Yeah. Well, and I was fascinated last week. Diva had an abscess. And that was the big thing that she was like, give me this. I want turkey tail, right? It was really, really important to have that in there on a regular basis for
yeah,
her. And interestingly enough, it never blew out like a traditional kind of big abscess would blow out. And she'd been quite sore. And I was working with other energy medicine and various things, but there was also this sense that, her system was like, yeah, give me the things that I can use to
yeah,
heal this
yeah,
this piece, right? Hmm.
yeah. Well, it's unbelievable for immunity.
Yeah. Yeah. She's feeling much better and she still wants it. So I'm gonna keep her on it for a good, as long as she would like give it a try. And yeah, it
Yeah,
feels it feels like a good one for her. And I love that connection that you're making between horses and mushrooms. Is like
yeah.
that mycelial complex, thinking of horses being this connected being, right? I really get that sense for them,
Well,
you
and
know.
sense of community, right? Like
Yeah,
horses, like herd with the herd and things like that. Whereas, and with mushrooms, it's very much a sense of the forest community, right?
totally.
Not just
Totally.
but the community of everything, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it mushrooms are pretty amazing when it comes to that, and easy to give,
Yeah.
super easy to give. I haven't seen any horses react negatively to them. You can just do them like 3 months on, 3 months off, 3 months on, 3 months off. Unless you have a horse that's got chronic disease,
Totally.
chronic laminitis, chronic, Cushing's or metabolic syndrome, or metabolic disease.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't hurt for them to have it every day.
Totally. Yeah, that's what I'm feeling for Diva now with her aging process. It's like, let's give her, that this is something that can be so supportive for her as things shift. So, yeah, I wanted to speak of, as we finish up today, one of my absolute favorite products from you is the equine gut soothe. I mean, I think I told you before that your healthy gut for dogs basically saved my wolfhound's life. So endlessly grateful. He's 9.5 now. He's doing grand. But at the time when he was diagnosed with pancreatitis, it was literally the thing that brought him back to life, along with homeopathics through, working with remedies. So I want to talk about gut health, particularly today, just because we're a horse podcast as it pertains to horses. And it's a huge topic, I know. Yours is one of the few products I've seen. It has species specific, like equine specific strains of probiotics. And I find, I'm always very much like, I go to my applied kinesiology, I go to my feel. My girls pick your probiotic above any other at this point, which I always, I give them the options. Can you share a little bit about the inspiration for that product, and how it might be different, or what you're noticing about it in
Yeah.
particular?
Well, I mean, Gutsu originated at my clinic for things like inflammatory bowel
Yeah.
disease, ulcers, GERD, things where there was really, really severe inflammatory response in the gut of whatever,
Yep.
whether it was a horse or a dog or a cat, it didn't matter. And there's, Gutsoothe has a lot of specifics in it. It's got 30, I think 32 ingredients in it. L-glutamine and acetylglucosamine and DGL, which is licorice
Yep.
root. The list goes on and on. And the thought process behind that is that we need to get bacteria in. We need to get a diverse bacteria in. We need to feed that bacteria in order for it to be, viable and stay alive. But we really need to soothe the gut down. Like
Yep.
we need to get that inflammation out of there. We need to calm it down so it can heal.
Yep.
Because if it doesn't heal, whether you want to look at leaky gut, whether you want to look at, ulcers with horses, whether you want to look at just chronic inflammation, inflammatory bowel disease, it was what I put together at my practice that I found profoundly supportive,
Mm.
like unbelievably supportive with animals that had inflammatory bowel disease. That in homeopathy it was crazy. But I don't think, I'm not even going to say, I never had a case of IBD, cat or dog, that didn't completely turn around with homeopathy and gut soothe,
Yep.
like completely. So with horses, I know every one of the horses that come here have ulcers.
Yep.
I don't have to look
Oh
at
yeah.
it, the water syndrome, lower gut, upper gut, you name it, they have it. So when I was looking at species specific, because that was the other thing, right? Is that I'm a strong believer also giving the gut healthy bacteria that comes from their species.
Yep.
The same. So when we did the dog one, we also did a horse one. And so the gut soothe has all of the herbs, all of the nutraceuticals. It's got larch for a prebiotic. It's got 14 strains of like diverse,
Yep.
different strains. And then it's got the equine specific one, which was developed, targeted, and then researched for horses from horses. So from the manure of healthy horses.
Mm.
So,
Amazing.
and when you look at those things, it's just fascinating to me because one of the things that we look at the most is, well, first, does it live in the acidity or the gut pH or the alkalinity of a
Yep.
horse's gut, acidity of a dog's gut? Does it maintain its viability in that specific pH, right?
Yep.
And does it get to where it needs to go? Does it stay viable to get to where it needs to go? That's one of our first tests that we do with it. And then a big one that I'm always concentrated or concerned on is something called immune modulation. So when the immune system goes out of whack, if it goes too low, then horses get flus and secondary bacterial infections and things like that. That's a low immune system. Too high of immune system is like metabolic syndrome, like hives. Like, a lot of people that think, oh, metabolic syndrome isn't autoimmune, but I think when I see horses, I just think that they're screaming autoimmune, unless they
Hmm.
have a full-blown bacterial infection or virus.
Yep.
If there's something typically very wrong with them, most of the time I think it's an immune mediated disease. So it's an autoimmune disease. So the body's gut has the wisdom and the ability, given the right tools, to modulate the immune system. So anytime a horse is put on any kind of steroids or even sometimes antihistamines, you're looking at they're trying to suppress its immune system. So, you know, and you do have to do that sometimes in life-threatening conditions for sure. But that isn't how you can live, because when the immune system is suppressed, as soon as you take them off of it, you get a rebound effect.
Yep.
So then it gets 1,000 times worse. It is really bad. Immune suppressive drugs are really bad for the kidney and for the liver.
Hmm.
And they're suppressing their immune system. So they're constantly in that vulnerable place of getting viruses, right? Or
Hmm.
bacteria.
Hmm.
So we all have that ability to modulate our immune system, right? To get our immune system, if it goes too high, it brings it down. If it goes too low, it brings it up. And that happens, that transpires in the gut.
Mm.
So the gut is coordinating all of that with the correct microbiome, with the correct gut flora. So those were the things that we really paid attention to with gut soothe, is that it would work on the integrity of the gut lining, it would soothe it, it would repopulate the proper floras, it would immune modulate, worked as an
Yeah.
anti-inflammatory, dot dot dot. So that's been the concept behind
Mm.
gut soothe from its conception.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, I love it. I love it as a product. Yeah, I've been really, like I said, really I'm a fan. I'm a fan of your of the Adored Beast Apothecary and what you've put together. I'm really grateful, really, really grateful for all the work that you do in the world, Julie. I just have this sense when you're sharing of this vast wisdom that you've sort of gathered over the years and that you're putting towards helping, continuing to support and help animals. So thank you so much for your work.
Oh, you're really welcome. And without people like you, I mean, that's what we need. I said to someone, we need mycelium.
Right, get it
We
out
need
there.
like this connection of mycelium out there to get all this out there. But I don't know whether I have a vast wisdom. I think I always say that I'm a vessel,
Mm.
right? Like I try really hard not to put myself in a box and look at what I think is to be true, right? I
Yep.
always I always want to go and be like, okay, I want to learn what I want to learn. Show me something new, show me something
Yeah.
different.
Right.
Like being in nature or just nature itself, how it works. So yeah, it's a really interesting, without divulging too much stuff. My cancer project was published in a really high-end peer-reviewed
Amazing.
journal. Yeah, so that was exciting. And then we had actually two of them. And so Dalhousie University just did a press release on it. So I had to go to Dalhousie. Dion, my business partner, and I went. And when we were talking to one of the other scientists that's working with me, we've been deciding on specific carcinogenics to
Yep.
use. And they went with this one particular one, and it's intense. It's intense. But she said, well, we decided to go with this one because this is what I was doing my PhD in. So
Mm.
I feel very comfortable with it, and I feel very comfortable working with it in this research project. And I said, well, what is it? Like, we haven't started it yet, but this is what we're doing. And she said, it's for it produces lung cancer.
Mm.
And for a second, I was like, okay, but we're really looking at osteosarcoma.
Hmm.
That's like the big one for me because it's brutal when an animal gets osteosarcoma.
Hmm.
There's not a lot of options, other than taking its limb off.
Yeah.
And then most of the time, once that happens, it goes to the lungs. And, but we don't really know what causes it. So we can look at liver tumors, we can look at breast tumors, and we can use carcinogenics that we know are directly
Mm.
related to those kind of cancers, which we did do in our primary study. We studied breast cancer, human liver cancer, osteosarcoma canine, and lymphosarcoma canine.
Yeah.
So four of them.
Wow.
And but my original focus was with osteosarcoma. So I sat there for a minute and I'm like this is so interesting to me because we used to be able to do x-rays. And well, I'm just trying to say like being open to like just being a vessel for wisdom because when you when you took x-rays to make sure that there was no metastases in the lungs and then you would remove the leg, right, on a dog or cat that has osteosarcoma, even when you did x-rays and there was nothing there, it'd be like bang, and they would have lung tumors,
Wow.
right? Like it would just, so I often would say, I think it's starting in the lungs because they do
Yeah.
CT scans now, but they're saying that even those don't show them in their very, 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 very primary
Mm.
presentation. And it's like, well, what if it is starting there, and then it's going as a homeopath, it's going and affecting a limb instead of something that it can live with it in their limb longer than they can live with it in their lungs.
Yep.
Do you know what I mean? They have to
Yep.
breathe. They also have to run and stuff, but as a homeopath, we always think inside out,
Yep.
right?
Totally.
So, if it's coming out, if it's expressing outward, we can, whatever. So I just found it fascinating that this particular scientist that we chose was doing her PhD with this particular carcinogenic, and it's probably the most perfect carcinogenic for us to use
Mm. Mm.
looking at osteosarcoma.
Yeah.
Like philosophically, that's my hypothesis.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, why did that happen? Why was that just brought to me
Yeah.
in that way? I think that's what nature does to us all the time.
Yeah.
Like all the time. If we are open to receiving the information and not scared in just in our little box of what we know to be true from
Yep.
science. And as you know, I'm a science nerd. But if we get too caught up on the other side of that, then we're not doing ourselves, our horses, or our families, or anybody, any planet,
Mm.
you
Mm.
know, any,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just think, yeah, I think it's for me, it's just that I've dedicated my whole life to it.
Yeah.
It's just I kind of live and breathe and eat it.
Well, and I love this dedication to just being open, right? To be observing, being aware, and being open. I feel I live in a very similar way. What's the next step that may not even be obvious, but just that opens,
Yeah.
and then we step through, right? And learn. And then, so well,
It,
yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it's funny because we were all sitting around the table, the like the two scientists and myself, which is heading the whole project. And I could have just gone, well, oh well, whatever. Like that's, there is no specific thing for
Yeah.
osteosarcoma. I guess that's as good as anything. To actually start thinking, okay, well, this is that and this is that, and let's back it up.
Yeah.
Like that's what I always do is I back things up. I kind of look at it going backwards. It was it's really exciting for me, and to think that it just kind of showed up like that.
Amazing.
So
Yeah.
yeah. So thank you for these podcasts,
Hmm.
and again, bringing that knowledge out there for people to embrace or not, or look
Yeah.
at, listen to, and go, oh, that's interesting, but I'm comfortable in my philosophy, which is equally as good, you know?
Yeah.
If you get a little tiny bit of information that supports your horse, right, or your dog or your cat, for me, is, every little tiny bit that I can help in any way, to me is
Mm,
a gain, right?
yeah.
It's something that they maybe wouldn't have done if they hadn't listened to the
Totally. Right.
body, right?
Yeah. And that's a win for sure.
Yeah,
Aw. Well,
absolutely.
yeah. How do people get in touch with you or
Yeah, adoredbeast.com or
perfect?
adoredbeast.ca. And we have, if you sign up or subscribe, then there's newsletters when I'm doing lectures or I'm lecturing. I'm going to Virginia,
Totally.
where I'm going to be lecturing, or my YouTube stations are sort of like what's new,
Yeah.
like what's new. We had our social media girl come with us to Dalhousie, so she'll be putting some stuff on Instagram and stuff, so you can
Awesome.
join our Instagram and see what we're doing research wise and things like that.
Amazing. That's
Hmm.
incredible. Well, thank you so much for being here once again. And just want to thank everybody out there who's listening in. I hope you learned a thing or two. I know I absolutely did today. I'm so glad to have some of those little curiosities of mine and sort of things shifted or answered around homeopathics and other things. So much appreciated. And we will check in with you all very, very soon for our next episode. Have a great day, Julie.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks so much for listening. I am very excited to share that I'm now a distributor for Adored Beast Apothecary because I love their products so much. I'm only now doing it as pickup only from my home in Duncan, BC. But if you are on Vancouver Island and are interested in ordering some of these products through me, please reach out at alexa@alexalinton.com and I'll add you to my next order. Okay, I hope you enjoyed and learned a thing or two. This was one of my favorite episodes in terms of learning about all these amazing ways we can support our horses. I'm wishing you a wonderful day.